So much for having me. Getting organized is big business. Actually, they expect it to be over $10 billion in the year 2020. And it's easy for us to recognize that because it's easy to buy things, but it's not so easy to get them organized. So I will speak to all the things that we need to get organized, but before we move on to those specific things that are important to organize, I want to have you all take a moment to just imagine, if you've ever had this happen to you, you know this feeling quite well when I ask you, what does it feel like when you lost your wallet? That moment you went to find it, you didn't have it. Was it your phone or your wallet? And you realize you don't know where it is, and it has a lot of your personal information in it. And so many of us will feel panic initially. We'll try to retrace our steps. We'll try to inventory what was in it. We worry about ID theft. Will someone use my credit card and start charging things? And usually we beat ourselves up because we're trying to use our memory to remember what was in our wallet. And there's a lot easier ways to actually manage that if you're ever in that situation. But after you do that, you have to get to work. So once your wallet's gone and you need to start going to action, you have to contact the credit card companies. You have to go to the DMV and get a replacement driver's license. You may want to put in a fraud alert to credit bureaus if you had more substantial personal information in your wallet. I know often people still will put their Social Security card in their wallet. Some people have passcodes that they keep in their wallet, so you need to change all those passcodes. And then you need to contact all your insurance carriers. But there's a ton of work that you've created for yourself because you're not sure where your wallet is and what happened to it. So I wanted you to take a moment to think about that, because the real work and what happens to many of us in our lives is that we have to actually step in for an incapacitated family member. And we don't know where their financial resources are. We might not know who their advisor is. We don't know what accounts they have or how they pay their bills, how they're set up. So we're stepping in to help them, but we really don't have the tools we need to be a good advocate and to be a good helper to them. And there's a lot of issues that come about when we do need to step in. And so we're going to talk through what you need to have organized so someone could step in for you. And if you're concerned because you might be the person that needs to step in for someone else, how you can work with them to help prepare yourself and help them so you can be a better advocate should that time ever arise. So I come to this topic mostly as a daily money manager. I work with mostly older adults and busy professionals, helping them pay their bills, sort their mail. They're just too busy or don't have the time, or they find it really challenging to manage their bill pay and they don't want to deal with it. Most of what we end up doing as daily money managers is actually providing a layer of scam and fraud avoidance. We see a lot of things that come in on the credit cards that we know to stop. I've walked into clients that are still paying for dial-up services that they just never really thought about because it was only $7 or $8 a month, but over the course of a couple years, that can be thousands of dollars. Home maintenance and scheduling. So there's a lot of things we do when we walk into a client's home to help them better manage their day-to-day finances. And so a lot of the examples I will give you come from my experience in dealing with families that I work with in my day-to-day business. But I actually walked into this profession because I started doing this for my own family. So the reality is that everyone gets caught off guard. We're not always prepared. As you've seen all those commercials, life happens fast. And there are statistics that most of us, we've seen, we've heard, but we just don't realize or think about how that might impact us. And so the first thing I just wanted to bring up are a couple of those statistics so you know why it's really important to get organized. The first is that anyone over the age of 40 before they reach the age of 65, 43% of us are likely to have a long-term disability event before 65. And so that's a period lasting from it can be short-term as 3 months, but it can go up to 6 months. Consumer Reports actually did a study that found out couples who have joint finances, 3 out of 10 of them could only cite their top 3 financial accounts and knew how to get access to them. So if you're a divide and conquer household and you divvy up those responsibilities, the fact that you don't talk about it or really know where that is can be very problematic for you if you haven't had this discussion with your partner. And I think, to me, the most concerning statistic that most people don't think about, we'd all prefer to die in our sleep peacefully, is that 7 out of 10 of us that turn 65 will need 3 or more years of long-term care. And that long-term care means that someone will probably have to pay bills for us. They will have to probably help us be a medical advocate, and they'll help us need to make choices about how we want to live our lives and navigate many of the health concerns that we may face. So even people that are really prepared might not be ready to let someone else take over because they haven't really documented their life and their accounts. And I walked into this profession 7 years ago. My parents had planned really well. I worked in corporate America in business development and marketing. I'm the youngest of 4 siblings, and I'm the only one that lived near mom and dad. I am the baby of the family. So my sister, the lawyer, actually was set up with the durable power of attorney originally. And my parents had the estate plan, their financial plan was all done. They even had insurance and long-term care plans. And they were living in a continuing care retirement community to help manage their care needs. But both of my parents started to have health issues and memory issues that prevented them from actually being able to be their own advocate and even pay their bills. And things were getting lost and bills were not getting paid, water was getting turned off. So I ended up leaving my job as I was caring for my 2 parents. It was just too hard. And I ended up writing a business plan and a system to help organize all this information for caregivers so that more families would be ready if they needed to step in and help a loved one. So that's where I ended up getting the award from AARP Foundation for the older adult focused innovation. And I ended up writing my book on organization. And so that's how I walked into this, is really out of my own family's personal need to get organized and what I needed to know to be ready for them. So I'm going to share some of those stories with you to help you see where they might intersect with some of your lives. So most of you, since this is a webinar, I can't ask you this question directly, but I will share some of the more popular questions. And if I don't answer your question, please feel free to send the email in to info@ebwllc.com.
Yes, the email, if you have any questions, info@ebwllc.com. And what we're going to do, this presentation that you're watching is going to go up on our website, and we're going to work it into a story with the questions that Kay received. She'll answer those, and we'll put those into a fantastic piece that will be published at EBW, hopefully by next week.
Great. So I will tell you, most often when I do this presentation to a live audience that's in the room, they ask me first, what can I do to make my parents put this information together and give it to me? Because I know I'm going to need to help them. So we'll talk about that in the end. But I also, on the flip side, I also get questions from the parents that say, I've been trying to have this conversation with my children and they shut me down every time I bring up the topic. So these are things that I recommend everyone do. It can be a family exercise. It can be something that you bring up over the dinner table. It should be something you bring up when you see a news story. But there's very nice ways to have this conversation without it feeling like you're grilling someone and making them turn over all your financial information. So we'll talk through that as well. So first I want to address, why is this so difficult for us? And for many of us growing up, we grew up with a telephone, we mailed each other and we had conversations. But we've gone through a shift with the technology. And today we have chat, we have mobile phones. So many of us have multiple phone numbers where we can be reached. We have email addresses. And the average computer user has over 25 accounts with different passcodes that reflect a lot of different bits of information that we have and that we use to manage our day-to-day lives. And we intersect with that the fact that most businesses and our government, as you've noticed probably for any of those that remember getting a mailed Social Security statement, most places are moving to online notifications or emailed information. So you don't get a mailed Social Security statement anymore. They want you to do self-service. So you need to have a username and passcode to often go to your Social Security, to go to your medical insurance company, as well as there's a huge benefit to doing it with your banking. And then we're using it to do things like shop on Amazon or print our pictures or share personal information with our friends through Facebook or Pinterest or Instagram. Many, many things are online now. So we have a lot more information to manage. And the reality is that most of us, we're digital immigrants, and we don't really recognize how difficult it is to move from being a human that's always used paper to migrate our information to the online world. So we have file cabinets full of paper information, but now we have to manage a lot more accounts. We need to manage usernames, passcodes, PINs. We also have security questions and answers that we need to manage as well. So it's harder for us to manage the information just because we're not used to having to move to a different method of it. So we'll talk a little bit about how you can do that and simplify it, because the reality is that everyone can boil down your personal information to fit in a 2-inch binder. We don't need these huge file cabinets that we're managing all the time, and it doesn't require that you put everything online. So I am still a paper person, still love my paper, but there's ways to traverse this divide and become familiar with being good at managing your digital information too. So the scary part of this is that the fact that we don't organize our information very well is very expensive to the American people. In 2013, they added it all up from all the state and federal treasuries and found that over $58 billion was sitting with a state or a federal treasury. It's money that's lost in a move, a personal crisis, or death that families don't know about, and it goes unclaimed, and it gets turned back over to a state or a federal treasury. Because we haven't documented this information, it's very easy for this to happen to you. And I am going to give you a site where you can go search for this information and see if you or a loved one might actually be able to claim some of that missing money. And you go to the website, www.missingmoney.com, and you'll see on the screen, it looks like you put in your first name, your last name, and the state, and press go. And it will tell you of likely matches across the country for any name match to your search. So you can do it for yourself, you can do it for loved ones. You should just know you should never have to pay anyone to get your own money. And you typically have to go do the filing with the state or the federal treasury where it might be located. So we did this for my dad. I did this about 5 years ago, and we found $2,500 that was listed in the state of Kansas under my father's name. We moved away from Kansas in 1969. So that money was sitting there for a very long time. We had to provide a color copy of his driver's license, and we needed to provide a land record of the property they owned at the time. So a lot of the information that I share on the important documents and accounts checklist that you all can get is because I've had to use it either for my family or for some of the clients I've served to help claim money or information or burial benefits even. So that's just a note, a good thing to go look at. And if you do find money, please send me a note, because I'd love to hear how much money people find after my presentation. So please share that with me. I also want to speak to some of the subtle ways that Americans are getting exploited daily. And many of you will probably recognize some of these issues coming to your mailbox. So exploitation is really when businesses or individuals or even charities are using pressure tactics or misleading language to lead seniors into financial mistakes. The National Council on Aging estimated this at over $36 billion a year. And they believe about $17 billion of it is exploitation. When people are just giving money away because they believe they should or they're obligated to do so. Many of this can be seen in the mailings that you guys have probably seen, and I'll go over some of those examples. But one of the issues that happens is that we don't know is that actually as we age, and unfortunately this starts at around the age of 50, our brain has subtle changes and it makes us more trusting. Where you would think as we're aging, we get wiser and we might be less trusting of individuals. There's actually a shrinking to the hippocampus in the brain that gets smaller, and it actually makes us lose the ability to recognize a distrustful face was actually what they tested. So just wanted you to know that, because as we think we're getting wiser and better as we age, there's also some parts to our brain's processing that make us more trusting of those around us. So here are some of the examples, and I noticed this first with my parents. My parents used to give every year in January. They would go through Charity Navigator and say, we're going to give X amount of dollars. They'd pick their charities out and write their checks every January. But as I started to visit them, this is actually a picture of my mom's checkbook. I saw that they were writing all these small checks to a variety of charities. And I looked at the mail, and the mail said, "Thank you for your pledge." And so the way that the charities are marketing has changed. And so they're almost doing an assumptive close where they're assuming that you're going to give to them. And so my parents thought that they might have pledged money and they didn't want to go back on their word. So they started writing checks to lots of charities they'd never given to before. And once you start giving to a charity, what most of you may have recognized is they typically sell your name to other like charities. And so you start getting beg requests from them as well. So there's a lot of great ways to give. I hope you will talk to your financial advisor about the best ways to gift your money, because writing checks like this wasn't really the best course of action and can actually clog up your mailbox in the future. But you guys have also heard about the IRS and the Microsoft calls that come to your home. I've been getting a lot of Social Security calls letting me know that my Social Security number has been hacked, which I find incredibly humorous. But we also have had people knock on our doors. Those are typically called woodchucks, where they'll say, I'm working at your neighbor's house down the street. Give me $500 today and I'll take care of your work, and I'll come back next week when I'm done with that project. And they never return to do the work. So you don't ever want to give money to a door-to-door solicitor. There's lotteries. And another one that you might have noticed is subscription renewals. You remember that you just renewed maybe your New Yorker, and you find that 3 months later, they're writing you back and asking you to renew again, thinking that you might have forgotten that you just renewed your subscription, and they'll just keep renewing your subscription as often as you write that renewal check. So just be mindful of those things. So especially for those of you that are worried about someone in your life that might be at risk, the ways to fight back are to just enforce with them. You never give personal information to someone who has called you over the telephone. I actually tell my clients, just don't answer the phone if you don't recognize the number. And even if you do recognize the number and it's something that you're not expecting a call from, if it's important, they'll leave a message and you can always call them back. So wait for that and call them back and verify that phone number. If you're having work done in your house, if you bring in a plumber or even an HVAC provider, I always recommend to everyone to at least get 2 written estimates before deciding on what you should do if it's a billing over $500. I've had a few too many clients have a plumber come in to unclog a toilet, and the plumber leaves $7,000 later because they have a host of other work that they say is critical that they get done. So unfortunately, there aren't a lot of protections in the Commonwealth of Virginia if a service provider does this to you. So just be mindful, and I always recommend to get 2 bids. Some of the things you should make a record of are items under warranty, magazine subscriptions, and charity donations for the reasons I just mentioned in the previous slide. Some of the things that put you at risk are those seniors who suffer from forms of dementia, because there is some short-term memory loss. And actually, once we get to the age of 65, some of us might start noticing that our processing is slower. So those are things we think do put us at risk. So taking notes and having good records can help protect you. But some of the people that are at risk can be quite surprising. Actually, those people that are at risk are usually financially sophisticated. They end up having a lot being victim to many frauds. They're often college educated. They usually are urban dwelling, and they're typically friendly. So they're open to having that conversation with an individual. So those are some things that I do notice, is especially for individuals that are at home, they're living by themselves and they don't have a lot of socialization. When the phone rings, they pick up that phone call and they're happy to have a conversation with the individual on the other end of the call. The problem is we don't really know who that person is, and that can be very concerning to family members if someone is opening and engaging with those conversations, even if they're well-educated and financially sophisticated. So what we're going to talk about today really is coming up with the idea that you don't want to have a single point of failure. You don't want to be the only person that knows all this information and keep it in your head, because if something happens to you, no one else can step in and help you if they don't have that information. And we'll talk about all those places where that can be very problematic. So I do have a handout, the important documents and accounts checklist that you can get from your advisor. So write in to your advisor and ask them, and they will send you this checklist. And it's really designed to give you step-by-step items that you can pull together and put in a 2-inch binder and have a roadmap of everything in your life and your personal inventory. So the ideal thing is that I do just want to mention is, as I mentioned when we started about that wallet conversation, if you don't have it already, I recommend that everyone make color copies of everything in your wallet, because should you lose it or it gets stolen, it's very easy to be able to close down the accounts and know what you need to replace if you have a copy of it. You can also use that color copy if you need to provide proof for something else. And the reason I say color copies on most of this is, in general, if you're asked for copies of things, color copies are harder to fake. So most financial institutions ask for, or government entities, when are looking for documentation, they will ask you for color copies, not black and white. So I hope you will think of creating those color copies. I'm also going to talk about the durable power of attorney and medical power of attorney, because these are two documents that every American over 18 should have. And as we have graduation season coming up, I hope you will consider giving those as gifts, graduation gifts, because these are actually important documents for everyone over the age of 18, because their parental rights go away. But everyone actually does have some medical issue with HIPAA getting so complicated, and even having banking relationships. That financial power of attorney is very good. I believe this so much that for my son's 18th birthday, I gave him a durable power of attorney and a healthcare power of attorney. I know it was not his favorite gift, but I have had to use it many times while he's away at college, either helping him do something with the bank, taxes, and thankfully I have not had to use the healthcare power of attorney. But should something happen to him when he was traveling, and even though he's using our insurance, unless it's a critical incident, the doctor isn't going to speak to me without that document. So I hope you will get a durable power of attorney and think of that, which gives someone the ability to control your financial affairs. And I will say that there are some roadblocks to these. Durable powers of attorney can actually be contested. So I've had Fidelity tell me they wouldn't recognize my parents' durable power of attorney because it was over 2 years old. USAA would not accept it in me when I wanted to help them with my parents' home insurance because it was over 5 years old. So you want to have these things, but they're not the absolute end-all fail-safe. And I'll talk to why you want to do some online ways to actually help manage those things. And the healthcare power of attorney is for those medical issues that someone should have to be your medical advocate. So that's just my public service announcement for the seminar. And I do also want to just talk to two issues. Is I do get questions about this a lot. Should I get a safe or should I have a safety deposit box? I personally prefer and recommend that people get a fireproof and waterproof safe for their home. You can actually get ones that aren't very expensive, especially in a metropolitan area. You really need one that has, Consumer Reports recommends getting one with a half an hour of fire protection, which will cost you less than $200 to put in your home. So you have 24/7 access to all of your important information, and someone else can get to it as well. The safety deposit box is great for some things. However, you do need to give signatory rights to the individual you would give those powers, or you would want someone to get access to that information. And you're also at the will of banking hours. So those are just two things to think about. And if you have some confusion about that, you can always send an email, and I'm happy to answer that question further. So the most important thing to think about first is getting your personal documentation organized. So we talked a little bit about making copies of everything in your wallet. Those are those personal documents that are important. But it also goes to your birth certificate, your social security card, marriage licenses, military and service records. And these things are very important to have documented because you may need them to help someone, or someone might need them to help you. So in my case, my father passed away at the government shutdown in October of 2013, and we did not have his DD-214. My father served in the military for over 35 years, and he was planning on having a military burial at Arlington National Cemetery, and you can't even start that process until you have the DD-214. So if you do have someone with military service, having a record of that in advance is super helpful, because you never know when that might impact you or your family. And another time I needed a certificate of marriage is my parents were still married when my dad passed away, and my mom passes away and she wants to be buried with my dad at Arlington National Cemetery. And we cannot bury her with my dad until we provide a color copy of the certificate of marriage. Now, my mom was getting the military benefits of my father. They knew that they were married, and Social Security was giving her those benefits as well. However, we needed to provide a certificate of marriage to actually move her burial along. So there are some instances where you're going to need this documentation where you think, why do I need that? And it's just easier to ask for in advance, have it ready, so you don't have to go do a search and go grab it should you ever need it. So the financial, I think, is one of the most important places to consider how you organize and how you document your information. Because as you see, when you think about it, we have banking relationships with probably more than one bank. We might have relationships with different retirement accounts. We have a financial advisor, but we might also have a plan with work. We might have CDs that we've opened up accounts for. We have car loans. We have home mortgages, and we also have relationships with utilities and credit card companies and online bank accounts. There's just so many places that we have created relationships with, and a lot of times you set things up and you just forget about them. And so what I see happen most often is when families or an individual doesn't have it organized and families don't know, the first thing they do is they say, we're going to simplify them. We're going to start closing down all these other bank accounts because we don't know why they have so many. Well, unfortunately, one bank account might be getting Social Security payments. Another one might be making the mortgage or the long-term care insurance payment. And so people don't really understand the repercussions if they start shutting down these accounts. It just makes things much more difficult. So I worked with a client, Susan. Her husband passed away. And I don't know how this happened. I'm sure she's not exactly quite sure as we started to peel back the onion. But at the end of the inventory, they had relationships with over 30 different financial service providers, from bank accounts, annuities that her husband had set up, to CDs that were set up. One was from Ohio. One she knew they got when they got a toaster when they first got married. They still had that bank account because they just loved that bank, even though it wasn't one that they were really using. So it took dozens of hours to navigate all those different accounts because he really hadn't documented it. So it took almost a forensic accounting approach to find out where was the money coming in, where was the bills being paid for, what was paying for the home insurance. Many of you might have had a credit card flag for fraud, and you know they tell you you need to go update those payees that you might have set up. And so having those organized will be helpful to you as well if you have a documentation of that information. But creating some kind of roadmap just to your cash flow, you can put that on one piece of paper and just put notes about the different relationships you have. Will be really helpful just to create a map for yourself if you ever need it, as well as would give someone else a clue to how you've structured your day-to-day finances. Another thing to consider for this is thinking about your how you set up this information. So Stephen is an individual I've worked with for several years. He works in the financial services world, and he's like, "Hey, I get it. I have documented all this for my wife, so she has quick access to it. She knows it's on my computer, and she's seen the spreadsheet and walked through it." And I said, "That's great. Does your wife know the passcode to your computer?" And there was silence. His wife had no idea what his username was to get on his computer. So it's great if you set that information up, but you need to make sure that you give someone the keys to what is the passcode to your computer? What is the passcode on your phone? So how might someone get to that information that you've already set up for them? I've seen this unfortunately happen more often with younger adults where there's an issue and mom and dad want to help the adult child, but they have everything on their computer and no one knows how to log into the computer. So thinking about writing those passcodes down can be very important to you and your loved ones who want to help. There's lots of places where the online world really does drive us to set up our usernames and passcodes even when we don't want to, but it does make life easier for us. For instance, you will save so much time if you go on to My Social Security, if you want to get information about your account or your past history, than it will be to navigate their phone system. I have never been on a call that's been less than 2 hours, just waiting in a queue to get to a person who could help me. Blue Cross Blue Shield, any of your medical providers, all of that information should be set up. And it's really important to write down your usernames, passcodes, and PINs so someone else can use it. And I'll go back to an example of my own family. My husband was traveling. My son cracked his computer, not his computer, but his cell phone. He was getting ready to jump on a plane. And the only way for us to go to the AT&T store and get him a new phone was for me to know my husband's information because the account was in my husband's name. So I had to have that information to go online and set those things up to ship a new phone to our home so he could have it for his travels. So, and in that instance, I needed to answer the security question of what was my husband's best friend in 2nd grade. So having that information was really helpful to me and my family, and it comes across in very innocuous times and places. So writing them down can help. And I bet many of you on this webinar have probably failed your own security question. So it's a good idea just to write down your own answer because sometimes they're case sensitive or you only put in a one-word answer when they only want the city. You don't need to put in city and state. So having that will be really helpful. So we just had a, I don't know that they can hear this. Well, for the gist of this actually is he's getting his passcode hint, and it was the name of it was his cat's name. And as you saw, he had lots of cats. So you can keep going. But the idea really is that even our own passcodes hints will fool us, so we need to make a note of those things. And just to warn you, another word of caution is when most of us don't read it, but those terms and conditions we agree that you and only you will have access to that account. So powers of attorney, there is nothing that gives someone else access rights to your usernames and passcodes. So that is why I tell people, especially for home and personal information, write down your usernames and passcodes and share them with your loved ones so they can get in and help you when they need it. So just to kind of, the digital world does create some complexities because they are pushing us to online self-service. For those parents out there, please know that you have no right to your minor's account details. So I recommend that you ask your children to write down their usernames, passcodes, and PINs and put them in a sealed envelope that you never hope to have to open. But if something would happen, and that would be very valuable to your family, or your child is an avid poet or photographer and all their information is stored digitally, which we know for those of us with younger kids, all of their information is online. Having it written down can be helpful. And in our household, we actually create a system so that I've written down my usernames, passcodes, and PINs. So we do quid pro quo. So we are offering this and sharing it to each other because we want to make sure that we can be each other's best defense. The last, as I mentioned, is the good news is that the technology companies are really trying to grapple with it. The legal world and the technology world are really at different places, but Facebook and Google are both working to offer legacy contacts, and many other companies will be moving toward this so we can set up those digital rights. But until then, please write down your usernames, passcodes, because that is the only way that a loved one may be able to get to their information. So for many of us, it's super obvious that having information about our medical history would be very helpful. Those, again, most of that stuff is in an online portal that your doctor sends you to, so you can go get your own digital records. I usually recommend to individuals that the next time you go to a medical appointment and they give you that 4-page document to write down your medical history, take 2 copies and just fill one out and put it in a file that someone could get access to, so they could easily have background information on medications or surgical history. I find it super helpful to me because I don't necessarily remember when I broke my leg, because that was a long, long time ago, but you usually get asked those questions. So writing that down again is good. It's helpful to family members to have information about your personal medical history as well as relatives. So in my case, my dad actually ended up having a tumor on his tongue, and my uncle died of a mouth cancer, and we were very concerned that it might be some kind of familiar pattern. Because my cousins had records of it and we had records of it, we could at least find out that they were very unrelated cancers. They just both happened to be in the mouth. But having that kind of information written down and documented can be really helpful to family members later on in life. It's also a good idea to write down your immunizations, because actually that can save Americans a lot of money if you're getting your pneumococcal and your Prevnar for pneumonia, as well as shingles and DTaP. All of those are really good things to document so someone may know your history. And it will also refresh your memory on when the last time was you had your tetanus shot. So one of the items I wanted to share was an individual I worked with. Tim had 2 sons. They were his medical powers of attorney. One lived in Seattle and the other one lived in Portland. Tim lived in Maryland, and he lived with a domestic partner. And I asked Tim, who's going to show up at the hospital? And he said, well, my domestic partner's going to show up at the hospital. And I reminded him that his medical powers of attorney only named his 2 sons that lived across the United States to speak to the doctors. So the person that's going to show up to the hospital with him doesn't have any way to help him in the hospital. So I just wanted to give you that story to think about. When you set up those powers of attorney, really consider who's going to be the person that you want to show up and that who will show up, and that can help you. So think about the practical side of what could really happen in those situations. Household is another place. We've been blessed with great home appreciation in Northern Virginia and in the Metro DC area in general. So keeping track of those things about our house can be very important, from your mortgage statement and who you're paying to, most importantly, keeping a letter when you get released from a mortgage, even when you refinance. Keep a copy of the letter that says you've been released from that mortgage. That happened to me where I went to go refi my home, and a mortgage 3 mortgages ago was still on my record. And so we had to go find the release for that. And it was a bank that did not exist anymore. And it took several months to resolve. So I just caution you to think about keeping those kinds of documents that you've actually been released from that mortgage. But things to think about are your warranties. Is it covered by a warranty? More than once, I've had a service technician show up and actually try to charge me for a call that's covered by warranty. And I could, show him, here's my warranty, it's covered. I called and made the appointment through your warranty department. But it's a good idea to have those records. Any home improvements you make, super value to keep a copy of the contract, the service that was done, at least a copy of the check. So have some sort of record on any home improvements you've made. We're keeping our homes for long amounts of time. And it's a good idea to be able to use that to bring down a cost basis when you go to sell that home. So think about those types of information. One of my clients, Rose, was moving into a retirement community. We went to sell her home that she lived in since 1970. And when we went, it's always a good problem. I'm sure you've heard this before. It's a great problem to have to pay taxes on money that you've earned. But if you've made home improvements, which I know she had because she'd been in her home for over 40 years, and I could see the home improvements, we just had no documentation to prove it when she went to sell her home. So we ended up paying taxes on that capital gains on her home. So think about those future problems that you may have. Some of the last things I recommend people make copies of or document birthdays, personal contacts. A lot of times you might have this in different places. It might be in your phone. You might have it in an address book. Where is the one place where your close friends might be listed so family members can get in touch with them? Frequent flyer accounts or travel reward accounts. If you ended up in the hospital and a family member wanted to come visit you and you had a ton of miles, could you use your miles to have them fly in to come help you? Thinking about a schedule. Do you have someone come take care of your pet during the week? Does your pet require certain medicines or vitamins that they take, or do they not like a crate? All those general things that are in your head that someone might not know about can be really helpful if you write down that documentation. And as we talked through earlier, having that list of those subscriptions that you have. I had Birds and Blooms on here because my mom actually renewed that for 15 years because she just kept renewing it. She wanted to make sure she continued to get that magazine. So writing down the subscriptions can be helpful. So now I've told you 200 pieces of information that it's really important that you document. It doesn't take a lot of space if you make a copy of it and put it in a binder or write down the account numbers and information about it. But usually that brings up the question of, okay, so when do I save it and when do I shred it? And I also have a guide that you can get from your financial advisor called What Do I Save? What should I save and when do I shred it?
And if you would like to email us at info@ebwllc.com, once again, info@ebwllc.com, we'd be happy to send both of those two documents that Kay has spoken to you. We have both those ready to in PDF form. We'd be happy to send those to you as soon as you email us if you'd like to request those.
Great. So I'm going to do a quick run through of some of the things that are really the guidelines about this. So at the end of the day, it really comes down to your own level of comfort. Some people, as another professional organizer I've worked with likes to say, some people are belts and suspenders. They want to have two methods of safety. And so they're going to wear both the belt and the suspenders to make sure their pants don't fall. But everyone doesn't need that, and you don't need to have all those protections in place. So think about what is your level of comfort with what you need to save. And I would ask those people that are trusted advisors in your life, talk to your financial advisor about what you need to save. Your estate lawyer, your attorney or your accountant, or even your life insurance agent. Get their advice on what records would be helpful that you should be saving in your 2-inch binder that's going to be your roadmap. You can also contact the IRS to ask about how long you should keep your tax records. Because in general, I know that most of us have this idea that we need to keep them for 7 years. And that doesn't actually apply to everyone. The IRS guidance is right on the screen in front of you. For the majority of the population, they only need to keep their tax records for 3 years from the date you filed your return, your last return. So you don't actually have to keep them for 7 years. I know every accountant I've asked has actually told me you need to keep your tax records forever, which is super not helpful. But I would ask yours if they have some guidance for you, and it comes down to your comfort. I've actually started getting rid of mine past 7 years. I don't keep them any longer. For some other things that I've done scanning for clients, so you can scan it. If it's more than 7 years old and you still want to have a copy of it, it doesn't take much work to get a scanner, scan that information and keep it digitally, if you really want to keep a copy of it. But it's just paper and it's just going to follow you around. So when should I shred it? So I have a longer documentation that you can request from your advisor that gives you more guidance about by items. So how long do you keep a sales receipt? And this is actually from the Federal Trade Commission that gives some quick guidelines. So they say you should shred immediately any sales receipts or ATM receipts and paid credit card statements or utility bills. Your utility bills you can actually go request in the online portal. So there's a lot of things that you don't need to keep. Typically, I keep sales receipts until we see the charge, or if it's a big ticket item and you need to know that it's covered by warranty, you might need that sales receipt. So keep sales receipts for items that go with large, big ticket purchases. So those are some of the guidance they give. So there are some nuances to what you keep and when you should shred it, but those are some quick rules of thumb. And if you go to the FTC, I also have a PDF I can send you, or I'll give it to your financial advisor to send to you, that can go, this can hang off your shredder to give you those guidelines so you know what to put in there. So when should you shred it? For a year. So pay stubs you can shred after a year. I would validate pay stubs against your W-2 if you're concerned about that and you want to keep that paper. Bank statements you can keep up to a year, and any paid and disputed medical bills that you can keep. The one item that I warn people is for bank statements. I know for individuals that are looking at if they're older adults and they don't have a lot of money in their retirement fund and they need to qualify for Medicaid, they need 5 years of bank statements. So you might need to keep bank statements longer. So there are some nuances to personal situations, and I'm happy to answer any questions about those if you have a specific issue you're trying to address. After 7 years, any tax-related receipts, tax-related canceled checks, W-2s, or records of your tax deductions taken. So you can shred that, and if you want to be super concerned, you can also scan it and keep that digitally. And then they also give some other, it depends. So your auto title you would keep until you don't own it anymore. Your home deed you keep as long as you own the property, but then as I mentioned before, your mortgage release you want to keep forever. So you want to keep a copy of that forever. And your home improvement receipts, you want to keep them because when you sell the home, they will be very helpful to bring down the cost basis. So things that you keep forever that we've also talked about, those important personal information documents, your birth certificate, social security cards, and marriage information, citizenship papers, all of those things you can keep forever. So the Federal Trade Commission tells you to keep your tax returns forever. I don't think you need to do that. So everyone has their own personal level of comfort. So you can decide what's best for you and your family. So I've told you all the documents you need to keep and organize and all those things that you can shred and what you need to save. So it's a lot of information. So that's why I provide those handouts to you so you can use it and go over time. You will not get organized overnight. As the saying goes, you eat an elephant one bite at a time, and you can do this in very small increments. When I stepped in to do this and help my parents, it took me more than a year to actually get a handle on their cash flow and their bank accounts. It takes time to do that. And it's okay that it takes time, but just recognize you're working toward that goal and you're working toward creating that personal roadmap of yours. A lot of people, it works really well to do it when you do your bill pay. So when you're updating bill pay information, you can put that information in that 2-inch binder that you create. You can also set, if you have piles, stacks of paper in your office that you know it's important, but you really haven't touched it and don't know what to do with it, set a timer. Make a date with yourself one day a week and just set a timer for 15 minutes and just start making some progress toward getting that pile down. As soon as you get going, you'll find it so much easier to manage and do, and it's not a big chore, but you just have to start working toward it. You can also think about how easy it'll be to replace if you need it. So if you have a filing cabinet with 7 years worth of bank statements and you're not likely to need them, I would go ahead and shred them, because most banks will allow you to go back for 7 years and go download those statements when you need them and if you need them. And you can also digitize it and store it safely. So 2 words on digital storage is, if you use a CD, they can get scratched. So they're really only good for 2 to 5 years. So think about getting a flash drive. Those items, like a personal flash drive, there's no moving parts. So they typically will store your documents and information for up to 10 years, and they can store gobs of information and photographs. And if you have trouble doing this for yourself, there's a lot of daily money managers that can help you with this process. So you can go to the website www.admm.org to find them. They will help you collect papers and get all this stuff organized. So there's resources, and you can search by zip code. So if you're not in the Metro DC area, or you have a loved one that might need this help, you can find a resource for them that's local to them.